I mean, you literally have birds falling off the skies every day, and they get about 30 black kites daily. So the amount of kind of death and violence and it's fairly staggering. And they have this kind of unsentimental, wry, put your head down and get to work, which I find which is interesting because it's not gloom and doom, and the main kind of I think broader disposition towards a lot of climate change movies or environmental films and so on is that uh, it either kind of holds you by the collar and instructs you to feel bad, and thereby often becoming somewhat prescriptive or pedantic and so on, or has a kind of a utopian hereafter. And the brothers kind of put in a kind of hard labor and are interested in as much in the world of folklore and myth as they are in the world of evolution and science. So it's really the intersection of all of those things that was exciting. And I think different emotional states or philosophical positions towards climate change is what was interesting.
What I also loved is that documentary is a very different kind of engagement with the subjects that, you worked on the film for about 3 years and of course spent a fair amount of time with them. And then the producers, after the film came out, not only were the brothers traveling with the film, and I think they went to as many festivals as you did, but for a year, their hospital that rescues birds and treats them was also funded by the producers of the film for about a year.
Right. So firstly, we should clarify that obviously the ethical compunctions of the documentary form are a bit different from fiction, obviously, and you're dealing with the real material of real people and their lives, and very often, obviously, there is something inherently extractive and exploitative about documentary. And I don't mean it in the usual sense of even people with a fairly good ethical toolkit realize that there is something, slightly, if not coercive, extractive about the act of going to someone's house every day for 3 years to film. And you can't kind of sidestep that. And in order to get the kind of quality of behavior that one needs on screen to get observational, verite, naturalistic behavior, you have to kind of keep visiting, keep showing up, because you know that the first few days, the material that you get is trash because people are too,
They're conscious.
They're too self-conscious, and the main ambition of the form is to be instead of behave in front of the camera, and you need that kind of, texture of time that is soaked in banality and so on. And that requires time, and inevitably a lot of verite documentary films take 2 to 3 years to film, especially the kinds of films that me and some other colleagues kind of work on. So consequently, it means that documentary is not a charitable enterprise. I'm getting a fair amount of money to make the film. At the same time, you have to tiptoe the line wherein you obviously can't directly pay in a way where you have control over. You don't want to be able to control everything that they're saying, because that's a bit dodgy ethically as well. So the deal that we worked out is that when we make the sale of the film, and the film got sold to HBO, and we decided that a certain percentage has to either be paid by HBO or our American studio partners. And aside from that, through the filming, one of the members of the family who would help us kind of handle birds, etc., we would also pay the salary of an assistant director. So that's what kind of worked out. I mean, I don't mean to sound in any way self-congratulatory, because it's not my money. And it was really the, the producers and the HBO deal, etc., that kind of. So as long as it's transparent and over the table, and we're kind of clear in terms of what the equation is, I think it works. And there's no one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter kind of a arrangement. So for instance, now the documentary that I'm making now is with a fairly well-known surgeon. And there's no question of, because there's no question of me paying him, because that's not the primary. However, you have to work out different kind of routes for what's fair and what isn't.
I think what also happens is, even though there's no one size fits all, in many cases, the subjects are not people who are really well versed with how this works. So having an ethical spine to even inform is something that's deeply appreciated. And I know that there have been instances where people have protested and not liked the way subjects have been treated, despite the fact that you've made the film for empathy and for things to get better. So therefore, highlighting the fact that this was done and this was asked for is wonderful. You spoke about your latest. I also want to allude to the fact that you're a cancer survivor, and I know that you were creating even while you were healing and you were in treatment. Did that alter the way you create?
Of course. I mean, again, just not to be kind of self-indulgent or self-congratulatory about this. The broader context of this is that I was interested in shooting a surgeon's life in Delhi, wherein if the previous film, All That Breathes, was about the abstract triangulation of air, birds, and humans. In this film, I was interested in the field of the human body in Delhi, and especially the work of surgeons who are dealing with the kind of scale of, environmentally inflected factors that are quite staggering. So that was the initial kind of interest with which I began, and then as things happened, lo behold, I myself got a kind of accidental shock diagnosis, and which entailed major surgery and so on, and that kind of got worked into the context of the film. So it just so happened that I was shooting a surgeon and then got diagnosed with cancer myself. Having said that, I mean, I also didn't have any of the usual, a lot of the troubles that somebody of an advanced stage have. So I'm a bit cautious to kind of overemphasize my own kind of struggles. Having said that, I think in terms of how the film changed, of course it changed entirely. But what's worth kind of highlighting outside of the narrative changes that got inaugurated, but were actually the fact that the filming also becomes a kind of a displacement or coping strategy at one level, obviously. Also to dissociate, but also it brings in a different kind of optical perspective, right? So if you're making a film on the human body in the city of Delhi, it gave, of course, a window to try and experiment with something that can be called becoming the body, right? So it gives a different kind of a personalized subject field outside of the object field of just observation. And of course it changes everything, because half the film then became a kind of view from the hospital bed. And inevitably what gets enrolled into it is, your own family and your own self, and you feel exposed in certain ways, but also you're very thankful for, the arm's lengthness that a camera or mediating the whole experience gives. While also being, of course, petrified and mortified by the accusations of being self-indulgent. So it's also an interesting kind of a aesthetic project. This is a film that's only just been edited and will only come out sort of next year.
But while all of this was happening, and you've taken 3 years to make All That Breathes, and probably this will also take another 3 years, in the middle of that, you've made one short, which was shot over 5 days. And it's your first foray into fiction. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've never done fiction before outside of film school, and non-fiction is a kind of, each project takes 2 to 3 years. It's really a kind of, it takes a lot. And I wanted to get into fiction, and somebody offered the resources for a quick short film. And when I was shooting All That Breathes, one thread was about, of course, the birds, and another thread was about termites. And I'd been tracking this guy who exterminates termites through the city, and he had a fascinating kind of perspective on how the city's architecture, urban life, design, all of it is extremely undergirded by our responses to termites or termite life. So as a documentary project, kind of filmed a bunch of that. I thought it would kind of be conducive for a fiction project, and that which I melded with a short story that I came upon became the basis of it. The jury's still out on whether the film works. I'm still, kind of working it out. So I can't speak of it with any confidence at all.
Yeah, Shaunak was very distressed that he finished something in 5 days, when he usually takes the timeline is like 3 years. Shaunak, you're also building communities. My question here, the first question is that, do we inherently make a mistake when we compare independent cinema, whether it's documentary or any other kind of independent cinema, with the mainstream ecosystem? Do you think we've been making that mistake and comparing a completely different kind of filmmaking with a completely different kind of ticket size, and kind of thinking that, and not really sitting and building pathways that are needed for distribution, for funding, for supporting people with a different kind of artistic vision?
So distribution is a whole black box. That's a different thing, and I don't know that I have the answers. And obviously, just in this room, there are filmmakers and producers who I should mention that Naren is here. I think I saw Yashasvi walk in, and so on. So just to kind of say that there's several people who are kind of working together. And
Yeah, actually, lots of people here. Arfi is here, Babita's here, tons of people. Yeah.
So how it began was actually not with in any way a kind of zoomed out, lofty desire to contribute to independent cinema. But the truth is that non-fiction is the tiniest niche at the moment, and also in recent years, I would say up till the success of Payal's film, in the last 10 years, if you took a sample size, non-fiction has pound for pound done better in festivals and awards internationally, from India, I mean. So Indian non-fiction has done really well, but it's a strange kind of a perversely limited kind of a terrain in which you have people who've won Sundance, got nominated for Oscars, won at Cannes and several other festivals, but it remains a really tiny subset. It's also the case that most young non-fiction filmmakers that I met were also entirely untrained, or I mean, that sounds patronizing. What I mean is that the avenues for how to raise money were completely obfuscated. And only a few people were getting either giant European co-production funds or American private equity. And a giant swath of people were not getting it. And there were only far and few platforms like Doc Edge in Calcutta and so on. And the truth is that, non-fiction is not so expensive. It's just not as expensive as fiction more often than not. So even a smaller kind of a contribution goes a long way, and you can kind of slowly stack it up in a piecemeal way. You can cobble together a patchwork quilt of funding slowly over time. And that's kind of not known to, because non-fiction is really niche and there is no existent armature for distribution. Despite the resounding success of recent Indian non-fiction films. So it just so happened that at the moment we're working with on different non-fiction projects, and I'm very honored and excited about working with filmmakers like Archana Fadke, who's making non-fiction film on a matriarchal seaweed community in Tamil Nadu, someone called Pallavi Paul, someone called Rohan Ranganathan. That's the documentary end of things. On fiction, so documentary, it's more of a cradle to grave kind of a connection, because there's such few people who kind of have figured out how to raise funds. In fiction, a film called Bakshabundi, that starring Tilottama Shom, that came out last year, that Naren was a producer on. Yashasvi's forthcoming film, The Ink-Stained Hand and the Missing Thumb, also a singular voice.
This is something that filmmakers do with long titles. He's right here, and he's going to Carlo Vivari in like day after. I don't know whether he's here. So congratulations, Yashasvi, and thank you.
So the documentary films are larger in scale, and the fiction films, at the moment, whatever we worked with, haven't been like large-scale productions. But really, it's there's such little existent infrastructure that even the tiniest sort of thing feels like one has done a big thing, which only speaks to how horrifically sparse the current structures are.
But we're really thankful that not only are you producing, so these 4 projects that Shaunak just spoke about, he's producing those at Kite Rabbit Films, that is his production house, and also with a bunch of really solid people. There's a platform called Doc Producing South, which they started, I think, last year, and it's had 1 edition, very successful edition, and there will be many more that will come. It's a cohort of people who've gotten together to kind of push the kind of stories and voices that they really believe in. And Shaunak, one last question before I wrap this up, and we are not in the middle of, we are not between people and their cocktails. How do you create in a world that is so rapidly, it feels like it's collapsing? Like, how do you get the motivation or even the desire to kind of keep creating in a world that is so fractured?
I mean, the fracturedness of the world is not a hindrance, it's ammunition. And also, I mean, for most people, I guess it's coping strategies and dissociation, and it only helps. The filmmaker Werner Herzog has a lovely line, which is that he quotes Rousseau, who says that when he was asked, what would you do if the world ends tomorrow? And Rousseau says, I would plant a tree. And Herzog says that if he was asked that question, he would start a film. And if I was asked that question, I would say I would start writing a film grant. Because, it's in the potence of making things in the future that things feel interesting.
Thank you so much for joining us, Shaunak. This was lovely chatting with you. Chat with you forever, and thank you so much for being patient and for being here. A big shout out to all of you for coming, and I also want to say that Meher Malhotra is here and Prerak Mehta is here, and they're the guys who went to Cannes this year with their short film. It was the only Indian film at Cannes this year. Big thank you to Inakshi, Devika, Ankita, and Sohini for just being the kindest team that I could have worked with. Please enjoy yourself. Thank you.